Asprilla, and there's the goal. 3-0.
Great carbon copy. Look at the defenders ball watching here, Brian. Look at them. They've allowed him. There's one man in the box.
You mentioned the other teams in the group, Adam. There's a lot of fun going on here, and I do remember that opening night watching highlights. And the game that stood out was Newcastle United 3, Barcelona 2. Newcastle United's first appearance, obviously, in the Champions League because of the extended tournament structure. And 3-0 up. I think Barcelona got 2 goals back. I'll ask David about Newcastle and come to you, Adam, obviously, about Barcelona and where the hell they were, because they finished bottom of this group incredibly. But David, a kind of weird situation for Newcastle. Keegan has gone by this point. Kenny Dalglish is the manager. Alan Shearer, I think, breaks his ankle. Certainly has a bad ankle injury in a pre-season friendly. So that really puts their season into a bit of a tailspin from the start. And was Shearer really ever the same again? Not entirely sure. But for Tino Asprilla, who would be sold, I think, in the January that year, he's doing Shearer stuff, a penalty, and then 2 Shearer headers either side at half time. Now, for those of us who remember Asprilla, he come up with a few goals for Newcastle, but not a lot of them looked like that. It was quite interesting, kind of thrown together, weird kind of period for Newcastle post Keegan.
Thrown together is the perfect description of this, and this is exactly the feeling I get and got at the time about this Newcastle, that it was ragged. A lot happens to them this season. There's the infamous Freddie Shepherd News of the World front page, in which he's sitting in a jacuzzi with, it's never quite made clear, but hookers, right? Doing substances, it's never made clear, but we all know. And he's saying that the fans are idiots. What was it? That they'll buy this crap that we stick in Newcastle, and it has to resign. They lose Shearer, which is huge. Dalglish, even by his own standards, looked just miserable to be there. From the second that he walked into it, he just looked really, really upset with everything that was going on. And before with Newcastle, they had always seemed, from Keegan coming in and bringing them up, like they were on the crest of a wave, right? That it was all going upwards. And then it stops when, they don't win the title, and then Keegan leaves. And now there's a sense of they don't have quite any direction anymore. Look at some of the signings. I remember at the time, even John Barnes, Ian Rush, wild. Stuart Pearce is in there as well for a bit. And
score in the last game didn't mean anything by that point, but they beat Kiev and at St James's Park, and those are the 2 goal scorers. But you're absolutely right. It's own guys. One thing I will say about this game, how reminiscent it was, and I when I watched the game I'm going to quote in a minute, it was what I remembered, and it was Newcastle against Paris Saint-Germain this Champions League season, where the place was rocking. They battered them up. I mean, that's all I can really describe it. They were just on something, totally in sync with the support. First time back in the Champions League for a long time. This is also the first night in the Champions League at all, and it's exactly the same thing.
Exactly
Emotion, blood, and snotters.
Yes, it was. It was a good old British performance. Go and watch the highlights, folks. Watch the goals. The noise is incredible. Because it was a great crowd, and they were super excited to be there. And it's Barcelona, and they do have players, although they had sold again as part of this sort of what is going on. They've sold Ginola and they've sold Les Ferdinand to Tottenham, who of course go on and are excellent for Tottenham. That kind of rubs salt in the wound. Obviously not knowing Shearer would go when they let Ferdinand go, and everything just seems a bit up in the air. But for one night, it's just throw out. It's a cup tie. They don't play it like a league match, even in a short league. Yeah, they chuck everything at this. This is kitchen sink, and you've got some. Faustino Asprilla was an incredible footballer. He had a bit of a life off the park, and he could be inconsistent. But when he was focused and on it, he was a wonderful player. And I think Barcelona are a bit taken aback because this is something different. This is a ferocity that you don't often get in Spain. Huge matches, but there's usually a bit more tempo, a bit more control. This is a British game in Barcelona. Even then, they don't get blown away in the way that match you referenced there, the PSG match, where PSG just completely shat themselves and were blown away. They stay in this match, but this was a one-off. It's not sustainable. You can't get out of a group of that quality relying on doing this in these home matches because it isn't going to happen like that. And also the expectation, which was already high among Newcastle fans at the time. Well, we've beaten Barcelona, so the expectation go up. But everything we've just discussed, the squad is misshapen and uneven. Dalglish never really seems to settle. He brings in big name guys who are way past their prime, and they do occasional things, and it's very occasional in the case of Barnes and Rush. But it just suddenly had this sense of, rather than being this club who had been, as I say, going up each sort of year and pushing and achieving a status, this was when you felt the year before maybe felt like they plateaued. This year I sort of felt they're going the other way now at the moment. And of course, Dalglish doesn't last particularly long. There's the whole embarrassment against Stevenage that we remember. And it just was, this kind of was a last hurrah, really, of that. And they go through, Hula will come in and, he won't pull up any trees either. And it really takes Bobby Robson to come in and stabilise the side in what feels like a completely new era by the time Bobby Robson comes in. It doesn't feel like it belongs to the same book. It doesn't feel like a different chapter. It feels like a completely different, separate story, because it is in a way. And I think this is the dying days, really. You can, for me, I would go to Keegan and go right through to the end of Hula, and I think that's that full cycle complete. But this was a wonderful game, really wonderful football match, and the highlights are terrific. But even then, you thought that's not sustainable. But of course, being an English side, they beat Barcelona. Of course, they could go on and win it.